folks are gathering more coffee and goodies and joining us in the circle, welcome. Part of why I love this church is our commitment, our eagerness to keep learning. It's wonderful that our church folks have this history of welcoming opportunities to hear and learn from a variety of people in our second hour programming. And it's a genuine pleasure to welcome Manny Copeland and Gwyn Chilcote to this conversation about the Haystack Meeting, History, and Monument. So it was a genuine thrill when Gwyn approached Pastor Mark about offering today's opportunity to the congregation. I want to also thank Ed Lawrence and Pastor Mark for building bridges with students at Williams, as do many of you, by the way. I recognize that. And I also want to thank the Advancing Justice team at First Church for organizing this event. I'm going to introduce Gwyn and Manny and then make a few remarks. Manny is a senior at Williams, majoring in political economy and studio art. She's from the Chicago suburbs, and like Gwyn, has been involved in Williams student government since she got here. Gwyn is a junior geosciences major from Des Moines, Iowa. She's been involved with campus memory and institutional history in a number of capacities in her time at Williams, including as a representative on the Williams Student Union every semester. This brief introduction that I'm offering is a joint effort by Advancing Justice members. I want to give credit. My teammates are amazing, and they will probably recognize their words in this because I am a chicken thief. I had a colleague in the anthropology department at Castleton University, one of the Vermont state colleges where I taught Asian and global history and women's studies, who said, when we were talking about our indebtedness to others' scholarship and how we constantly incorporate the research and concepts of others, we are all chicken thieves. My specialization was in modern China and East Asia, but Castleton being a small state college, I also taught world and global history, particularly the impacts and resistance to European and American imperialism in China and in Asia and the world. I emphasized when I taught that history is still with us, and I encouraged my students to track the ongoing effects in our world today. When I began teaching and studying about imperialism, that was our word of choice. And later on, when I began to hear the term settler colonialism being applied to the processes I had always called imperialism, I felt unsettled and unsure if that was truly an accurate term to describe that history and its effects. Similarly, decolonization, which is a term being used today to describe efforts to reckon with and disrupt the systems of oppression that imperialism and colonization put into place, including missionary work, seemed jarring to me at the outset. But as a practiced chicken thief, the more I read and understood how it was being used, including in the events and projects that Gwyn and Manny are engaged in, I began incorporating it into my own language. And I think my language is better because of that. Returning home last last night from an incredible student performance, part of the I.O. New Music series during winter studies, where I saw our terrific Zoom czar, Felix. I started thinking about how much, sorry, my hands are shaking. I'm gonna stand here and just let the podium hold this. Okay, I started thinking about how much we gain by going to these campus events, going to where the students are, and them coming to us. And how much I gained yesterday from the experience of music in new ways, and how clear it is that these students know more about certain things than I do, than we do. Of course, we also know more about certain things than they do. But I think for all of us, building our capacity to continue learning is key to our journey together. We may never get racial justice right, but I think we need to be open to seeing how Gwyn and Manny have an understanding of the Haystack history and its place in our world today that might be less wrong than ours. That's the attainable goal, to start being less wrong about things. As Nadia recently shared with me, what is learned can be unlearned, and that's a blessing. Maybe our church should become an unlearning center for fighting racism and white supremacism. That said, we hope that this is the beginning of a new, less wrong conversation. We will offer time for questions and sharing thoughts at the end of about a 20-minute presentation. And also, we want to offer that if you feel yourself unsettled or uncomfortable and you want to step outside this hall and to talk or feel or think or process with one of us, one of the Advancing Justice team members, please motion to me that you would like to step into the parlor and take a pause, or just go there. This pause practice is a tool that recognizes that deep feelings often come up when we talk about religion or faith and race and white supremacy. So finally, really finally, I want to paraphrase something from Isabel Wilkerson's powerful The Warmth of Other Suns, applying it to today's talk. May the Lord, or love, be the first one sitting here with us and the last out.
Share the microphone.
Yeah, there's one up there. Just push the power button. It's on.
Hello, I'm Manny Copeland. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
This is Gwen Chilcote. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Carrie, and thank you all so much for having us here today. We're really excited to kind of deepen this partnership with the church and have this conversation with your community. So as we mentioned today, we're going to be talking about the Haystack Monument and similar legacies and related issues in Williamstown history.
To start off, we want to explain where we're coming from and what standpoint and relationship with the college we have. So both of us are students. I'm a senior, Gwen is a junior, and we're part of the Williamstown Union, which is an elected advocacy group for the student body. So the students elect some self-nominated candidates, and there are 3 seats per class. And both of us have been on it for as long as we've been at Williams College. Our projects in the past have included things like mental health forums and advocacy, a winter study program that's currently happening where students run classes for other students and share their knowledge called Free University. We work with historical reclamation, so helping various groups reclaim history, talk about it, and share archival research on various narratives throughout history, and working with committees across campus as needed, and as we're called by administration and students.
So I wanted to begin with a timeline of Williamstown history, and I think I'm often frustrated by how timelines are set up, because in many cases, when we discuss Indigenous people and their presence on land, that's kind of like one bullet point, or like maybe an arrow in the other direction if it makes on the timeline at all. And I think, let's think about this timeline to scale, and I think it's first important to recognize that the Stockbridge-Munsee community and the Mohican Nation, this is their homelands, and they've been here for well over 10,000 years, and the events that we're talking about today make up a very, very, very small portion of that time. And so to that point, when we think about the origin of Williamstown as Williamstown, that is an origin of displacing Indigenous people. And the creation of Williamstown was done with agreements that were made between the Mohican Nation and Williamstown settlers, but that was an agreement that they came to out of necessity, because the Mohican people were already being kind of displaced, and that they were already really struggling, and they were in a place where they had to make these decisions. And so this is already kind of putting in a difference in power that Williamstown came to be. And that came out of the Williamstown settlers' ability to militarize and suppress the opposition coming from those already present cultures. And then ongoing history throughout Williamstown, it's also important to acknowledge that since that time, there's been a continuation of silencing of other narratives through militarization, terrorism, displacement, and memorializing events in a white man's image and from their perspective. And we're going to go into some examples of that and what that means as we go on. One example of that you might be aware of is the 1753 house, which is right up there at the Rotary, that lots of people are aware of. And though it may seem kind of harmless, just like a log cabin celebrating history, when we talk about 1753 as the origin of Williamstown, that inherently states that this is not Mohican homelands, and the important events started in 1753 or started with colonialism. And that really neglects the stewardship of this land and the culture and knowledge that came before that.
So we'd like to offer a land acknowledgement to start this talk off. So it is with gratitude and humility that we acknowledge that we are learning, speaking, and gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Mohican people, who are the indigenous peoples of this land. Despite tremendous hardship and being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Munsee community. We pay honor and respect to their elders past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. So there's a QR code, but there's also a number that we have where you can text to find out the history of your land, or the land where you are from, if any of you guys are from somewhere outside of Williamstown. And we can help people with that after the talk if need be. But yeah, we just think it's very important to acknowledge First Nations history and to talk about it.
And so we wanted to acknowledge the land that we're on, but for historical clarity, also want to point out that by the events that we're talking about, the Haystack, there were very, very few Mohicans left in Williamstown. So just to kind of clarify the timeline there, but we are also engaged with a lot of work with the Stockbridge-Munsee community, but just making that clear. So with the Haystack Monument history, the Second Great Awakening was a period of Protestant religious revival, specifically in New England, and it was characterized by really exciting camp meetings and new religious fervor. And so towards the beginning of the Second Great Awakening, here at Williams College, a group of students had like a regular prayer meeting, and one day in 1806, they were having their regular prayer meeting outdoors. When the story goes, there was a great thunderstorm and they had to take cover under a haystack. During this meeting, Samuel Mills proposed that they should take the words, "the field is the world," and suggested that people start traveling to other areas to spread their Christian religion. And so the individuals who we know were at this meeting are Samuel Mills, who we're going to talk about a little bit more, James Richards Jr., and then I believe was he a home missionary?
No. There was James Richards, who was a missionary, went off to do some missionary work, I think, in Asia. There was Byram Green, who went on to go be a congressman. There was Francis Robbins, who went on to also be a home missionary, and Harvey Loomis, who went on to be a home missionary, but I think you can get a bit more into that.
Yeah, so thank you. But Harvey Loomis, there's an asterisk by his name because he disagreed with Mills's ideas. He didn't think that we should have missionaries because he believed that going to places like Asia was too dangerous for missionaries and that the people there would need to be subdued before that was safe. Subdued, could imply military or cultural. But yeah. And so coming out from this meeting, Samuel Mills was the one who really carried this forward, and he founded the American Bible Society just a few years later, which went on to form the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions and other similar groups. So he was really a key part of sending missionaries from the United States to other countries and within the United States. So this hadn't really been done from the United States before. Obviously there's been the spread of religion in other parts of the world, but this is kind of the first time that people were specifically going from the United States to other countries with the goal specifically of spreading religion. So it's a very important historical event from that perspective. So with the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, this is the group that Mills helped form a few years after the Haystack Prayer meeting. This was formed in 1810 and is a very large organization that had a really major impact on missionaries from this point. So the first missionaries went to India, Ceylon, the Cherokee Nation, the Choctaw Nation, and the Sandwich Islands in Palestine. But from that point, they would go all over the world. This sparked support of foreign missions in the US, so then other organizations would go on and send missionaries to other places. So, really an important domino in that effect. And we believe, the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions itself sent thousands of missionaries in dozens of foreign lands. And it's important to note that while they did do some things like allowing, people often talk about this group specifically as one that allowed women to go be missionaries and in that way sort of promote feminism perhaps. It's important to note that also we know that they limited women's rights and for instance had a list of eligible single women who were missionaries. So it was, not necessarily just supporting them.
So now we want to go a bit into the timeline of things. So there was this prayer meeting, right, in 1806, and then 4 years later there was the founding of the ABCFM, which sent missionaries abroad and across the globe. And then from 1810 through the Civil War, they're sending off all of these different groups. But it's important to note the actual memorialization and the first kind of celebration of the meeting didn't happen until the monument was erected in 1867. This is important in that the Civil War occurred in 1861 to 1865. And at the end of the Civil War, a lot of groups within America felt destabilized in various ways, right? So there had been this war that caused immense grief across the nation. A lot of people were missing, a lot of people had died. And so following the war, there was a large revival within the American white communities to kind of reestablish stability in various ways. And to kind of participate within either furthering their sense of self, furthering their community, or furthering their sense of purpose. One of these people was Albert Hopkins, who was a brother of the president of the college at the time, of Williams College at the time, and also was a professor at Williams College, who lived in Williamstown, participated in the community, and specifically he founded a church in the White Oaks community. So White Oaks was a neighborhood in Williamstown, is still an area of Williamstown, is a place in Williamstown where historically there was a Black community. And there were indigenous people who lived there as well, alongside that Black community, for quite a few centuries from my knowledge. And during this time, Albert Hopkins and a lot of people at the college kind of saw issues with that community, saw it as a place of poverty, as a place of moral, or they called it a moral wasteland, essentially, of moral inferiority in various ways. And so wanted to uplift that community by building a church there, trying to create poverty programs and all these things. But in various ways, also them inserting themselves within that community created tensions, right? Because they were all white, had participated in various ways in the displacement of some of these people, had power dynamics between this community and themselves as they were outsiders looking in. And so that was kind of one of the first home missions, or not necessarily, well, yeah, one of the first home missions that occurred within Williamstown was this White Oaks Congregational Church, is what later became to be known about. This time it was White Oaks Chapel. The next year came the monument. The monument was erected as a part of a movement of alumni who sought to remember the missionary movement and further celebrate it. Again, at the same time that people within the college were trying to create home missions. And then later on, the White Oaks Chapel we want to talk about, in that the space that it had created of trying to empower this community within Williamstown that was trying to uplift others initially from what they saw as their poverty, their problems, their way of life, had also empowered white nationalism in various ways, had invited moral superiority above the people who lived in that community. And so the KKK became active in Williamstown in 1920s within the White Oaks Chapel. And so you had regular cross burnings within White Oaks, and you had regular acts of terror initiated by the KKK. This started in the 1920s, but the last known cross burning happened in 1960 on Williams campus, up on the hill, a couple of hills over, in front of Perry House, during a Black student organization party of Black students. And so from 1920s to 1980s, they were active. And this is important to remember in that there are still certain sentiments that exist within the community, as evidenced by the Soldiers Monument recently being, how would you call it, vandalized, with white power symbols and other incidents of white supremacist logos and symbols being utilized throughout 1920s to now and prior in various ways. But yeah, and so from 1866 was the beginning of home missions in Williamstown. However, there were other memorializations, other ways to remember missions and missionaries throughout this time, as in the 1930s, Mission Park, so the land just down the hill over there, was deeded to Williams by alumni for the purpose of honoring and respecting missionaries. And so whatever Williams does within that land has to do that, and carry on the mission set forward by the people who created the Haystack Monument. And so 1956, there was a 150-year memorial. 1981, there was a 175-year memorial. And in 2006, there was a bicentennial memorial. And so where the United Church of Christ comes in is that in 1995, the ABCFM, so that initial, or first mission, or Missionary Society, had partnered with the United Church of Christ and the Division of Ministries of the Church of Christ to form Global Ministries, which is an organization that now organizes a lot of the missions that occur from the U.S. outward. And so 2019 was the last, in 2006, at the Bicentennial Memorial, the FCC participated, and that was the first memorial that really started to reckon with the history. So a congregation from Hawaii, that we'll talk about it later, was invited to talk about the effects that missionaries had on their homelands and on their communities. And then in 2018, The Field is the World was an exhibition that occurred at WICMA, the Williams College Museum of Arts, that also furthered educating the community about the relationship between missionaries and Hawaii.
And so when we talk about these issues, in many ways we're talking about cultural colonization. And so what that means is, we talk about the advocacy that these groups would do on behalf of marginalized groups. So for instance, these groups often pose themselves as against the Trail of Tears, and supporting abolition, educating freedmen after the Civil War. Some of the folks that are named in Mission Hall, which is the dormitory there, kind of supported that. And the empowerment of women, that, as I stated, that's only in a certain way. But why were they doing this, and what was the motivation behind it? Well, it was all based upon this belief that these missionaries, that these people who were asserting their way of living, knew a more proper way to live than a, quote, uncivilized other. And in doing so, when they insert themselves into other cultures, they impose that way of knowledge and often, destroy the knowledge base that is already there, the family knowledge and the ancestral knowledge that is so core to ways of living globally, and it's imposing this other knowledge set over that.
And so there was, again, this cultural supremacy, this disruption of what was known within certain communities. However, there was also quite blatant white supremacy that went on hand. So a lot of missionary movements themselves were kind of weaponized by various US forces to infiltrate communities through political and military movements across the globe as a tool for white violence, with the goal of exploiting foreign labor and seizing land. So when we talk about Hawaii and other cultures, that's oftentimes what we're referring to, is missionaries went on to talk to people about religion and culture. However, in having access to communities, having access in very intimate spaces, various military officials, military powers also saw that as an opportunity to infiltrate those communities, either politically or militarily, and seize the property or seize people and their actual lives and labor through the missionary movement. And ABCFM had a lot of outreach, had a lot of reach. So the ABCFM alone went to 22 countries and over 7 indigenous nations on Turtle Island, which is the term that a lot of indigenous communities use to refer to what a lot of Western nations would refer to as North America. But inspired countless other missions and movements to many more countries and indigenous nations. The Haystack Monument shares a celebration of superiority, of racism, of colonial attitudes with Confederate monuments. That's a quote by Dr. Jeanette McCart, who wrote Monument Troubles, Rethinking What Monuments Mean Today, the Haystack Monument at Williams, which is a history of this. So as we said before, in the 1865 and forward time period of Reconstruction, a lot of people were trying to reassert their identity, and for some people that meant reasserting their white identities. And so the movement to have the church at White Oaks, the movement to memorialize these missions, oftentimes carried a certain knowledge base, a certain perspective that often prioritized the white men who were leading these movements. And in turn, those white men's biases, beliefs, and times violence.
And as we've shown you on the timeline, the Haystack prayer meeting, which clearly was, an influential and significant historical event, has been subsequently memorialized. And there have been many anniversary events at the Haystack Monument, and it's kind of interesting to look at how they evolved over time, from being, a celebration of sending missionaries abroad, and sometimes it was seen more as a celebration of, the church itself, and sometimes it was celebrating, the changes that they caused overseas and, the people that they ostensibly helped. At each of these, we see these redefined perspectives. As Mandy mentioned, at the 200th anniversary memorial, the First Congregational Church invited a Hawaiian congregation and was able to kind of have some reconciliation there, and starting those conversations. But we think, it's time to have ongoing conversations and think about how that continues to affect people today. This is still a popular pilgrimage site. In my time at Williams, I think I've walked past like 4 or so sets of pilgrims who come and visit this as like a stop along a New England tour of important historical sites. So this is a site that, many people in Williamstown, many Williams students might not really understand. But I found, when students do understand it, often it makes them feel, less safe and less comfortable in this space that this town is celebrating, such a site. And this is very ingrained into our campus and into our town space. And to others, it's a very important site that they go and they celebrate. And so this is a very, unmatched, unbalanced perspective towards the Haystack Monument. And so if you're to walk to the Haystack Monument and try to understand it yourself, right now you'll see a plaque. And the plaque today tells a very cursory account that we'll share with you soon. And so we want to think about how we can, improve that, and as a very first step, how we can improve people's education and knowledge just from walking past it. Change your experience of walking past that monument.
And so we'd like to offer first a framework for addressing space and monuments. So first, when we talk about monuments, we want our discussions to promote an ongoing dialogue. We don't want to just pop a new monument and be like, this is our effect at this time, or this is our perspective of history at this time. We want to invite continuous conversations with the knowledge that our monuments teach, and there's a back and forth relationship that we have with the spaces that we inhabit. Next, we like monuments often to complicate the narrative that we have. We like it to teach us and challenge us in various ways. We like our discussions to educate and engage with the community and communities that are affected by the monuments that we discuss. We'd like to incorporate perspectives from stakeholders, and I think the term stakeholders is a bit hard to understand, but it basically encapsulates everyone who's affected by the impacts and by the narrative of the monument itself. We'd like our monuments to kind of make visitors interact. The point of a monument shouldn't necessarily be to just pass it and not acknowledge its presence. We'd like to have an interaction with it and acknowledge that that interaction exists. We'd like, when we make changes to monuments, for it to ideally redirect funds to affected Black and Indigenous, as well as people of color and their communities, if possible. We'd like it to proceed with the consultation. This is specific to the Haystack Monument. It needs to proceed with the consultation of the college's legal counsel and in the spirit of the contemporary educational mission of the college, and have a neutral or positive environmental health impact. So when we talk about all of these spaces, we also should keep in mind that they're being built, and that has an environmental impact on the surrounding area and surrounding environment as well. Yeah, so Gwen just reminded me that I probably should explain the deed as well. So the Haystack Monument was, again, if we go back to the timeline, the monument was created in 1867, right? So 51 years after the initial prayer meeting. And it was deeded, or the land that the monument is on was deeded to the college in the 1930s by some alumni. And again, the deed had essentially stated that the college can use that land, has rights to the land, so long as they honor and respect the missionaries there and continue to uphold that history, continue to talk about the history. It's very unclear whether the college still needs to abide by that deed, since the separation of church and state is, I don't know, more asserted now than it was in the past, as well as the fact that the people, or the alumni who wrote that contract are no longer with us. And so currently the college's relationship to the land that the monument is on is legally a little murky. But it's our understanding that we can still change plaques, talk about how we discuss the monument, and remember the missionaries. And so the monument plaque that is currently there will be read.
So this is the plaque that is currently, on Mission Park Drive near the Haystack Monument, and it reads, Haystack Monument, on this site in the shelter of a haystack during a summer storm in 1806, 5 Williams College students dedicated their lives to the service of the church around the globe. Out of their decision grew the American Foreign Mission Movement, and then it says it's erected by the Bicentennial Committee, and so you see similar plaques to this around Williamstown from around 1953. This is a very, very cursory story. And as we've discussed, we think we want to complicate that and make it more accurate, because this is almost untrue by omission of so many facts. And so after speaking over the course of the past several years with stakeholders and community members and historians, this is the text that we've come up with to replace it, and we do have funding secured from the college. And
however, this is a draft. I do want to throw out. This is by no means a final. And we'd like to begin a conversation here on what more we can say, what less we should say, what do we think are parts that should be brought out.
And in a plaque, this is about as long as it could be for it to be an effective plaque, which is another challenge we run into. In any case, here's the text. During the Second Great Awakening, as religious fervor swept through New England, 5 Williams students gathered in 1806 for a prayer meeting when a summer storm took them by surprise. The students sheltered under a haystack here where they discussed the desire to spread the Christian gospel. From this conversation developed the foundations of the American Foreign Missionary Movement. Later followers of their movement memorialized this event with this monument, featuring the words from their Bible which inspired the movement's founders. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one. Matthew 13:38. This inscription spoke to the American missionary desire to serve the world by sowing a Western-centric doctrine of Christianity. However, this intention often conflicted with the self-determination of local peoples. The world must now reckon with the yield of their missionaries' harvest, proven to be far-reaching, complex, and ever-changing.
And so we'd like to debrief a little and have you guys discuss first the monument plaque that is currently there. So again, on the site, in the shelter of a haystack, during a summer storm in 1806, 5 Williams students dedicated their lives to the service of the church around the globe. Out of their decision grew the American Foreign Mission Movement. So if you could talk with a partner next to you for a bit, we'd like